Have you ever worked really hard on something only to have it be misunderstood by others around you? Have you ever poured your heart and soul into a paper for school or a picture that you drew, or any kind of creative endeavour, only for it to be underappreciated and overlooked? It's an all too familiar feeling for people who make things, no matter what kind of outlet they are involved in. Whether it be for work, university, or even just as a hobby, creating anything takes an exorbitant amount of time and effort, and it may even take a part of you. I started thinking about this recently after a rewatch of one of my favourite documentaries, Indie Game the Movie. If you're unfamiliar with the film, it chronicles the development and release of 3 independently made games during the late 2000s and early 2010s. The 3 games the movie follows are Super Meat Boy, Fez, and Jonathan Blow's Braid. And it's that last game that I really want to touch on. Braid was a puzzle platformer that originally released on Xbox 360 Arcade in 2008, and is widely recognised as one of the first major successes of the independent game development scene that was beginning to arise at the time. At first glance, the game appears pretty simple, a 2D side-scrolling setup where the player controls a character moving from one side of the screen to the other. There are some enemies in the way and the player can jump to beat them or get around them, but the real feature of the game is the ability to rewind time. Much like a VCR, when the player messes up or needs to go back to get a certain item, all they need to do is press a button and the game will reverse time to the point they desire. Now this wasn't an entirely new mechanic, and it had been used in games before, but never quite like this. The rewind mechanic was an integral part of the gameplay, used to solve puzzles, defeat enemies, and ultimately progress the story. The concept of time and our perception of it was even weaved through the game's narrative, with chapters being told out of order and new elements being added to the rewind mechanic of each level. When talking about this game, it's also important to mention the game's creator, Jonathan Blow, who is and was a hugely influential figure in the indie game scene. Many people even specifically mention him when discussing and praising the game, and he's often viewed as a creative pioneer of the industry and medium. Braid released on the 6th of August 2008 and was incredibly well received by just about everyone, becoming a commercial and critical success. But for the game's creator, something was missing. Have a look at this clip from the movie where John discusses this initial release period.
You know, when you work a long time on something really intricate like that, there's a hope that people are going to understand, the things that you did, and that you'll have some line of communication with your audience and things like that. And what some of the most demoralizing things were actually positive reviews of the game. The game would come out and people would say, oh, this game's great, 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10, and they'd say what's good about the game. And in many cases, it would be just a very surface understanding of the game that didn't even see what I thought was most special about it. Not that many people understood. And that was a little bit heartbreaking in a way. It's like, oh, I visualized that I was gonna have some kind of connection with people through this game. And they think it's great, but the connection isn't there, because they're kind of living in a different world still.
I know to some people this may seem a little pretentious to be disappointed with 10 out of 10 reviews for your game, but I really sympathise with Blow's feeling and expressions in this clip. There's something about the process of making a creative project that can feel so isolating and inward at times. Creating a project like a game is an incredibly difficult and time-consuming activity, and in the case of something like Braid, Jonathan was trying to make something much deeper and personal than most other games. Most AAA studios are huge teams made up of hundreds of people from all different walks of life, with various outlooks, opinions, and experiences of the world around them. It can often be difficult to make one of these big games feel personal and approachable on a deeper level because of this, as there are so many conflicting ideas and expressions being poured into a project. This can still produce some fantastic results, and some of the deepest connections I've had with games have been with titles from big studios. But a big studio is like a great choir of singers. Beautiful to listen to the collective, but difficult to hear individuals within. Jonathan made Braid almost entirely by himself. Apart from music and art, the game's core idea, programming and story are all his creation. This makes the game have an incredibly personal feeling, much like some books or albums where it feels like you're really interacting with the creator and hearing their thoughts and opinions about certain concepts and themes. Earlier in the film, he even talks about this, mentioning putting his deepest flaws and vulnerabilities into a game, likening it to interacting with a person face to face.
Things that are personal have flaws, they have vulnerabilities. If If you don't see a vulnerability in somebody, you're probably not relating with them on a very personal level. So it's the same with a game design.
Of course, the trouble with putting this much of yourself into a game or any sort of creation is the vulnerability that follows. More specifically in Jonathan's case, being open enough to try and express something in Braid and it being misunderstood or overlooked. Even though the game is a tremendous success, it's not really appreciated to its full potential in his eyes. Many ways in which he thought he might be able to connect with people through the game were ultimately unrealised by the vast majority of players. And there's an element of sadness I feel for John in this. On one hand, it's difficult to see why anyone would be disappointed with that much success, but I think if you've watched interviews of Jonathan before, or played any of his games, it's clear that he has a different approach to the making of them than most people in the industry. Plenty of people make games because they love them, or they have a great idea that they want to make so other people can enjoy it and have fun. And there are of course those who are there to make games purely as a job and source of income. But then there are those who are in games to be a part of how the medium is formed and evolving. They see it as an art form, and a very young one at that. It's still evolving and maturing, and in many ways has hugely untapped potential. I think this is where John falls in. I'm sure he loves games and wants to make them because he enjoys playing them, and I'm sure he's also very happy with being paid to do it. But I also think he makes games to express new ideas and challenge the pre-existing conventions we have for them. It's his aim to explore ideas and experiment with concepts previously unseen or untested in the medium. So when people see Braid as a platform with an ability to go backwards in time, to Jonathan this is overlooking so much of what he was trying to accomplish to make this game truly special. He hopes that people would see the deeper meaning beneath the surface level and understand some of the concepts he had attempted to incorporate. He can't have expected everyone to have connected with this, but to see so few must have been a disheartening experience for him, especially after investing so much time and effort into it. Yes, the game is a commercial success and adored by players and critics, but not in the ways he had so desperately hoped for. Of course, in some ways it's not up to John how his game is perceived and understood. That is the nature of any art. It's subjective and open to interpretation, but I still feel for him and his disappointment in being misunderstood. It's a tumultuous and exhausting process to make a game, especially one as personal as Braid. The explosion of indie games over the last 10 years has produced some of the most unique and creative projects that have connected developers so closely with an audience that was previously unreachable. There are games being made today that simply would never have existed before digital platforms like Steam, itch and Xbox Live Arcade, and they allow for so much deeper and personal stories and ideas to be expressed. It's down to the developers and creators to decide whether they wish to be so vulnerable in their games and creations. And when they are, there is always the chance and risk of them or their ideas being misunderstood or underappreciated for how special they are. I think Jonathan really wanted to be understood when making his games. Looking at his other projects, it's clear how serious he takes his craft. Despite his disappointments in the reception for Braid, it's evident he still leaves his flaws and vulnerabilities in almost every aspect of his games. Games require long hours, unrelenting creativity, and exhausting problem solving. But it may require something even more than that. It may require a part of the developers themselves. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like. Comment down below to join in the conversation, and subscribe to see more videos from the channel in the future.